Hello guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Skills and Abilities. Today we're going to be looking at the next in the poison tree, which is Poison Explosion. Poison Explosion is a rather sad ability. I really can't talk good about this ability. It's nowhere near as good as Poison Nova is, and it is nowhere near as good as Poison Dagger is. In fact, Poison Dagger honestly is better than Poison Explosion, and there's a reason for this. Number one, Poison Explosion is, at its core, not an ability that you can spam or use with any kind of efficiency. It is the same as Corpse Explosion in every single way, except instead of dishing out physical and fire damage like Corpse Explosion does, it dishes out poison damage. And it does it in a very, very tiny radius. And when I say tiny, I mean tiny. Let me go ahead and show you guys what I mean, and this is also a tip for you necromancers out there. If you guys are unaware of this, there are free corpses that always exist outside of Heragroth. I'm going to utilize some of those free corpses right now. So when you use Poison Explosion, what it does is it causes the body to emit a cloud. It's a very small cloud. It has a radius of about 2 yards. Not very big at all, and it doesn't even last very long. As you can see, it was already gone before the monsters even, were around. And let me kind of show you, within a group here. Let me go ahead and kill at least one monster. Alright, and with poison, a little resistance up, this is the ability. As you can see, it infects a couple monsters. And it does a pretty decent amount of damage to those monsters that are nearby where the explosion happens. But for the most part, it's very poor in terms of how it affects the targets, who it hits. Most of the times when you use it, it's not even going to really hit every single monster nearby. On top of that, the short duration of it means that, literally when it's gone in, a half a second... I know it's not a half a second, but, let's count it. So, let's see. Oh, there's another dead body around here. So, 1,000, 1,000, no, 2.5 seconds. So, it stays up for about 2.5 seconds, and in that time, it infects any monster that's nearby. It has a really small radius, which means that the body has to be directly beside the monster that you're trying to poison. And this is also part of the issue, is that if this were I don't know, any other ability that wasn't linked to corpses, if it wasn't linked specifically to a corpse, it might be okay because you could then cast the ability next to the monster, right? So if you're fighting a particular monster, you would just cast the ability next to the monster. But as it is, you can't utilize the ability without a corpse nearby. And then to further complicate this, probably I think as complicated as it can possibly be, is that Corpse Explosion is 1,000 times better to use than Poison Explosion in the majority of situations. Number one, because Corpse Explosion has a radius that continues to increase as it levels. So for instance, if I were to dump 20 points into Corpse Explosion, I could potentially hit everything on the screen with one corpse. Whereas with Poison Explosion, the best I can hope for is to hit a couple monsters which are next to the monster that the corpse is at. For instance, I just killed this demon imp, and of course he didn't leave me a corpse. Let's kill this enslaved right here. Let's see if this body is close enough to infect these monsters on the other side. So I managed to get one, but not the other. So literally this corpse that was standing directly next to the monsters that I'm fighting and want to kill wasn't close enough to poison both monsters. Now, I'm kind of done bashing this skill because it's a horrible skill. It is. What can they do to fix it? Now, I'm not really 100% sure. Being tied to corpses, I think, is probably one of its biggest downsides. mainly because it has such stiff competition from skills like Corpse Explosion. And no matter how good Poison Explosion is, I don't know if it's ever really going to compete with Corpse Explosion. But let's look at it from that lens, okay? Let's look at it from the lens of how can we make this ability into something that could actually compete with Corpse Explosion. Well, first off, the radius would need to increase with level. So obviously you wouldn't want the radius to just be massive from the start, but it doesn't make any sense to me that an ability like this would not have an increasing radius as it levels up. And if it did have an increasing radius as it leveled up, it could be an extremely powerful addition to the Poison Necromancer's arsenal. Now, granted, you still wouldn't be able to cast it without a corpse. And so just like Corpse Explosion, you would require you to have a corpse to be able to use it. You would also most likely need to use lower resistance in combination with it, which is definitely going to, be helpful. Another thing here is that the duration of the poison is extremely long. So despite the fact that it says it does 54,709 damage, which seems like an insanely large number, it's over 16.4 seconds, which isn't really as good as you think. If we were to run this on a calculator real quick, we could potentially figure out what our damage per second is. So you're looking at 54,709 divided by a total of 16.4 seconds, which is an average damage of 3,335 damage per second, which isn't really that great. And then you also have to take into account other things when it comes to poison. So you have to take in things like poison length reduction, poison resistance, and so forth and so on, which will cause that 54,709 to be far less than what it's actually stated. Now, granted, if you deck out your character with all the negative resistance equipment that you can, you've got a decent amount of plus to skills, poison skill damage, you're running a pretty decent level of lower resistance, you can usually mitigate a lot of that. But at the same time, it's still not really dishing out a huge amount of damage, especially when you consider that Poison Nova, which is eminently spammable, is far more AoE than Poison Explosion. And just to kind of like give you an example of the difference between these two abilities, like the massive difference, is that with Poison Nova, I can walk into a group of monsters and I can do this. And I can poison every single monster within my distance. And I can kill them all extremely fast with this ability. And with Poison Explosion, I can't even poison that monster over there. All these corpses are out of range. I can corpse explode. I can poison explode every single one of these corpses, and it's not going to help me with that monster that's over there. And now, granted, if I finally do come across a monster that is going to give me that ability to spam corpse explosion, or poison explosion, rather, I mean, it's some shattering corpses left and right. These guys are immune to poison too, which of course doesn't help my demonstration. And on top of this, there's another fatal flaw in Poison Explosion. So the last and final nail in the coffin when it comes to Poison Explosion is that it doesn't work on bosses. 90% of bosses don't have corpses around them. Uber Diablo, Uber Mephisto, Uber Bale, Pandemonium Diablo generally do not have any corpses around them. Diablo doesn't have corpses around him. Bale does not have corpses around him. Now, you do get some corpses around Andariel, but Duriel doesn't have any corpses around him. And basically what it ends up as is Poison Explosion ends up being useless against bosses. Pretty much any boss that doesn't have a corpse around him, you can't do anything with this ability. And it's just too limiting of an ability in general for an ability which doesn't really compete very well with something like Corpse Explosion. 9 times out of 10. Actually, 99,999 times out of out of 100,000, Corpse Explosion is going to be the superior choice to use in just about every scenario involving corpses. And then in that one scenario where Poison Explosion might be the superior choice, I probably would still just use Corpse Explosion anyway. I'm hoping that eventually they do some work on this skill, because it definitely is a skill that needs work. I think increasing the radius would have a huge impact on people's willingness to actually use this ability, because 54,000 damage over 16.4 seconds is a lot of damage that could potentially help out Poison Dagger and Poison Nova Necromancers. In fact, Poison Dagger Necromancers in general, I think, would get the most benefit out of an ability like this, because if you're running along with your Poison Dagger Necromancer and then you kill a monster with your dagger, being able to right-click and cause an explosion which hits everything nearby would definitely be a useful thing for a Poison Dagger Necro. In fact, there was one point where I actually had decided that maybe the way to fix Poison Dagger and Poison Explosion is to combine them. I know this sounds a little off the wall, but my idea essentially involved taking Poison Dagger and combining it with Poison Explosion, and making it so that whenever you killed a monster with Poison Dagger, they would then subsequently explode, making it an automatic process. So in other words, you just combine these two skills and you end up with a better skill overall. And I think honestly, that's not a bad way of doing it. There's really not a lot more to go over with Poison Explosion. I've talked enough crap about this skill. As always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching, and, if you do have to put 20 points into Poison Explosion to get that extra damage from Poison Nova, at least you won't feel bad about not using the ability, because, well, it sucks. As always, thanks for watching, and keep watching.